Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our final session of our Distinguished Speaker Series for the 2015-16 academic year. And we're greatly honored to have such an impressive and accomplished individual to take his time to travel from Washington to be with us today. I have the great privilege to introduce and welcome Ray LaHood, the former United States Department of Transportation Secretary. With a 36-year career in public service, Secretary LaHood has an extensive experience on major national policy issues, among them transportation and infrastructure. As the only elected Republican selected for President Obama's cabinet, Secretary LaHood served as the 16th Department of Transportation Secretary from 2009 to 2013 and sought to bridge the bipartisan divide between the new Democratic administration and the Republicans on Capitol Hill. He quickly became known as a bipartisan leader and a skilled conciliator in a highly partisan environment, just as he had during his tenure in the United States House of Representatives. Secretary LaHood's tenure was landmarked by efforts to improve safety in every mode of transportation, from aviation and rail to pipelines and automobiles. Under his leadership's improvement to America's infrastructure included building or replacing 350,000 miles of highway, repairing 20,000 bridges, and renewing or constructing 6,000 miles of rail track. Secretary LaHood also achieved stringent fuel efficiency requirements from automakers, took steps to address airline pilot fatigue, and turned the problem of distracted driving into a national concern. As Secretary of Transportation, he oversaw an agency with more than 55,000 employees and a $70 billion budget in charge of air, maritime, and surface transportation. Before heading to the U.S. Department of Transportation, Secretary LaHood served from 1995 to 2009 in the United States House of Representatives on behalf of the 18th District of Illinois, and also served on various House committees, among them the powerful House Appropriations Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. He is married to Kathy LaHood, and they have 4 children and 12 grandchildren. Secretary LaHood is also a brother to Trine alumnus and brother of our Trine member of our Board of Trustees, Steve LaHood, who also traveled to be here with us today. Steve, thank you for making the trip. Secretary LaHood has been a longtime friend of Trine University, having served as our 2004 commencement speaker, and also we proudly call him an alumnus as he received the honorary doctorate of humane letters. So at this time, before I officially introduce Secretary LaHood, I'd like for you to turn your attention briefly to the video for a brief presentation. Secretary LaHood recently chronicled, please go ahead. Secretary LaHood recently chronicled his life in politics by writing Seeking Bipartisanship, a book that describes the challenges of Washington, D.C. today and how he fostered goodwill among all members of the House of Representatives and the good of our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm Trine University welcome to the former United States Department of Transportation Secretary, the Honorable Ray LaHood.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And Dr. Brooks, thank you for that lovely introduction. I am very familiar with this outstanding university. My brother Steve, as Dr. Brooks said, has been a very, very faithful board member on the Board of Trustees for a number of years and is always very proud of his association with Trine University and has been generous to the university in many, many different ways, not the least of which is service on the board and other ways too. He has invited me to Florida to participate in the golf event, and that's where I have met some of you, and I was delighted to be the commencement speaker, as Dr. Brooks said, and even before that, Dr. Brooks was good enough, kind enough, while I was on the Appropriations Committee, to call me and see if I would have any interest in finding ways to be helpful to Trine University, and I'm pleased that we were able to do that. And having been the commencement speaker, I know what an outstanding university Trine University is, and what a great contribution it makes to Angola and this part of Indiana. My brother Steve came here from Peoria, Illinois, sight unseen, having never visited the campus. He showed up here with the idea that this university, at that time known as Tri-State, would offer him the opportunity to have the success that he has had throughout his life. And my brother Steve really, I think, stands as an example, and particularly for you students here. Some of you who probably made visits to Trine and visited other schools and ultimately made up your mind to come to this outstanding university. But my brother really did it on blind faith. And I think the leadership back then, as the leadership today, was a leadership with vision. All of these magnificent facilities that are here now and all of this commitment from this community and from the Board of Trustees was obviously evident back when Steve started here, but really got played out much more, in large part really to the leadership of the Board of Trustees, but also to Earl Brooks. The vision that Dr. Brooks has had for this university is a vision that is wide and deep and unending. And I know that each one of you that serves on the board and each one of you that attends this university knows you have an outstanding leader, a leader with a vision. And that's what it takes to accomplish what you all have accomplished here at this university. So Dr. Brooks, to you and your spouse and your family that have made the sacrifice to come here and to be a great leader, I know I speak for everyone at Trine and the community. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for your leadership. Please help me thank Dr. Brooks for all that he has done. I'm delighted to see your mayor here. I guess this is not a city council night, thankfully, that you could venture over to listen to our remarks. What I'd like to do is just talk for a few minutes about my journey, which is what I talk about in the book, and then maybe we could have discussion and see what all of you would like to talk about. During this political season, I would think that many of you are thinking a little bit about the fact that Indiana, which normally wouldn't play that big a part in a primary process, not unlike my home state of Illinois, by the time the candidates usually get to Illinois in a presidential campaign, we're nothing. People don't pay any attention to us. But this year, because of the length of this primary campaign, Indiana could see a bunch of political candidates showing up on your doorstep, maybe even on the doorstep of this university. You know, Bernie Sanders, he likes you young people a lot. And I'm sure many of you have been paying attention to what he's saying about all those, well, maybe because Trine treats you so well, you don't have that many tuition debts, but these young people, they love Bernie because of what he's been talking about in terms of having all of us that pay taxes take care of all your tuition debts. So I wouldn't be surprised if people like Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or Ted Cruz or maybe even the Donald, maybe he might even show up around here too. Who knows? Don't be surprised by anything in this campaign. And so we can talk about that if you'd like. To the students here, let me say this. I'm probably the most unlikely person. If you look in my high school yearbook from Spalding High School in Peoria, Illinois, there were 200 boys. Back in those days, the boys were in one building, the girls were in another. This was a Catholic school. You know, they liked to separate us back then. And of the 200 boys that graduated in my high school class, if you looked in my yearbook, not one person in my class would have ever said that Ray LaHood was going to be a congressman or secretary of transportation. And I went to Bradley University. I graduated in 1971. I say I was in the slow learner program because it took me so long to get through. But not one person in my mid-year class of 1971 would point to Ray LaHood's picture and say, that guy's going to be a congressman, or that guy's going to be Secretary of Transportation. And I tell you that because you have no idea what road, where your journey is going to lead you. But what you take with you from Trine University is a great education and a diploma and an opportunity, because we live in America, to do whatever you want to do, to be whatever you want to be. And I don't say that lightly. I'm an example of it. I finished my 35-year public service career in my dream job, being Secretary of Transportation. I started out my career teaching school, which is the only thing I ever wanted to do. While I was at Bradley, when I was studying, I only studied to be a teacher. I didn't study to be a congressman, and I didn't study to be Secretary of Transportation. And I taught school, and I liked teaching, and my wife convinced me to kind of move in another direction because she said we probably weren't going to make that much money. And for all you who teach, you know what I mean. So thank you, teachers, for doing what you do. Teaching is a great profession. I loved it. Because I was teaching junior high school students the Constitution, I got interested in politics. When Steve and I were growing up in Peoria, our father was a restaurateur. He worked hard his whole life, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. We never talked about politics. We never knew anything about politics. We couldn't have told you who the city councilman was or the mayor in our community, because we weren't a political family. And I think sometimes when people see politicians, they think, oh, he must have come from a political family. Not so. I earned it all the way. And so when I left teaching, I went to work for 2 congressmen. Congressional staffer for 17 years, and I learned about serving people. I learned about how to solve problems. I learned about government. And public service is very rewarding. It's like teaching. You can make a difference. When you help somebody with a Social Security problem, when you help a veteran get in a VA clinic, when you help somebody become a citizen, That's what we did for 17 and a half years as a congressional staffer, and then had the good fortune of being able to run for Congress and be successful for 14 years and make a difference. Not because of any particular bill that I ever passed, but because of the service that we were able to provide to the people who elected us. People not only look at their congressman as somebody who goes to Washington and votes on important legislation, but they also look at their congressman as somebody who can help them cut through the bureaucracy, cut through the red tape, get a problem solved. And we did that to a fairly well. And after 14 years, I decided that I wanted to do something else, that this was not going to be a lifetime career. I'm very proud of the fact that I went out on top as a congressman. Not easy to do in this day and age. I wasn't voted out, I wasn't carried out, and I wasn't indicted out. I went out on top. And what a way to go out as a congressperson, having served the people that elected me. 800,000 people in my district, all around Peoria, Illinois, friends and neighbors. During the time that I served in Congress, I met a U.S. Senator from Illinois named Barack Obama. When Barack Obama got elected to the United States Senate, I had never met him. I was in Congress from Peoria, and he was running for the Senate from Illinois, but our paths never really crossed. A few days after he was elected to the Senate, my cell phone rings. I'm in Peoria. He said, "Ray, this is Barack Obama." I say, "Congratulations on winning the Senate seat." He said, "I'm coming to Peoria and I want to sit down and talk to you about how we can work together for Illinois." And the reason I tell this story, and I tell it in the book, because I believe this idea of bipartisanship and working together is in Barack Obama's DNA. And I know that's contrary to some things that you've probably read or heard, or his last, 7.5 years in the presidency. But President Obama, when he was a senator, really worked with all of us in our delegation for Illinois. So for that 2-year period, while he was a senator and I was in Congress, we worked together for Illinois in a bipartisan way. He is a Democrat and me as a Republican. And I can tell you this, when the election's over, people don't care what party you're from. When the election's over, people don't care what your party label is. They want to know, how are you going to be helpful? How are you going to solve problems? How are you going to get things done? And the only way anything ever gets done, people like the mayor can attest to this, is when people work together, set aside party, set aside labels, and work together. And if you look at the 236 rich history of our country, we have always solved big problems. How? When people have come together. The way that all of you in this room who serve on the church board, the library board, the school board, whatever board you're on, whatever volunteer thing you do, what happens? You go to a meeting, you sit around a table, you talk to one another, and boom, you figure out how to solve a problem. And it's not about politics, it's about serving friends and neighbors. So Obama and I did work together. And then, as I said, I decided that I was going to leave Congress. And after President Obama was elected president, he was looking for Republicans to serve in his administration. And I got a call from his then chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, who was also a friend of mine. He was a congressman then from Chicago, and he and I worked together on some things for Illinois. And they offered me an opportunity. This wasn't that complicated. Rahm called me and said, "Come to Chicago, sit down with President-elect Obama." And I went on a very cold day in December after the November election. We sat down for 40 minutes. We talked about some things we had done together while we were in Congress, but more importantly, what I might do in the administration. And a few days later, I got a phone call and Rahm said, "Will you take transportation?" And I said, "Yes." Why? Because I thought that this would be one of the most historic administrations in the history of our country, the first African-American president. And also, it would give me an opportunity to continue to serve America. Not to serve a party. Now, I'm a Republican in a Democratic administration, and some people looked at it that way, and some of my Republican friends thought I was a little goofy for doing it. But I wasn't thinking about the idea of party. I was thinking about the idea of America. Thinking about the idea of service. Thinking about the idea of how we can make a difference in a very historic administration. And we did. And I'm not going to go into all of that. It's in the book. But my point is, again, how do you really make a difference? How do you be successful? By not getting all bogged down in a lot of ideology and a lot of philosophy and a lot of politics. When we set aside politics, America's a pretty great place. Which leads me to say this about where we're at with our current situation. Congress is at 7% popularity. President Obama hasn't been very popular while he's been president. And why is that? Because the American people think that Congress really doesn't do much. And doesn't really solve problems. And I frankly think, whether you like Trump or not, that's what he's tapped into. He's tapped into he's an outsider, never been involved in politics, and he's tapped into the idea that we need to solve some problems. Now, whether you agree with his solution on immigration, at least he's talking about solving a problem. And I think really that's what there's a real appetite for let's get some things done. 12 million people living in this country illegally. Nobody doing anything about it. A tax code where we all just finished our income taxes today, filed them, I hope today's the day. Too complicated. You had to hire an accountant to get your taxes done. America's one big pothole. Nobody knows that better than I do. We're not fixing up our roads. We're not taking care of our infrastructure. And so I really believe that until the Congress can come together and work together and solve problems together, the American people are going to be very frustrated with the political system. And I think that really is what a guy like Trump has tapped into. And why 35, 36, 37% of the people, maybe some who've never been involved in politics, have been able to say now that there's somebody that's speaking for them. And I think if Congress were working together, I think the worst example of it, on the day after Justice Scalia passes away, the Senate Majority Leader says we're not going to consider a Supreme Court nominee, which is their constitutional responsibility. And people are saying, what's going on? How come they're not doing their job? Now, you may agree with McConnell that they shouldn't do that, but it is their job to consider that. And again, people are wondering what is going on. How come they're not carrying out their responsibility? And we can list many other things, but there are a lot of big issues that are left undone, left unsolved. During the time, I got elected in '94. First time Republicans came in the majority in the House of Representatives in 40 years. Gingrich is the Speaker. Some of you remember this. Very controversial, very opinionated. Bill Clinton's in the White House, very opinionated. Wants to get things done. The difference between now and back then is Gingrich and Clinton came to Washington to get things done. And even though they didn't agree on much, during that period, very brief period, about 8 years, we passed 3 balanced budgets, we passed tax reform, we passed welfare reform, we passed 2 transportation bills with a Republican Congress and a Democratic administration. Why? Because both of these men, both of these leaders, knew why they were in Washington, knew why they were elected, to solve problems, to get things done. Those were pretty exhilarating days. 3 balanced budgets, unheard of before we came. 2 transportation bills, 2 6-year bills, tax reform, welfare reform that people had tried to pass for years and couldn't do, a crime bill that now is being criticized but was pretty landmark back in those days. Why? Because we had people who wanted to get things done and were willing to sit down and talk to one another. People with very, very different views, politically and philosophically, but with one view that government needs to solve problems. And that's the difference. We don't really have that today, at this moment in our time in history. And that's why people are frustrated. That's why there's a lot of people going to the polls. That's why there's a lot of activity on the political scene. And so let me go back to my original point, because I want to leave time for questions. What time do we want to finish this? Yeah, okay. My original point is this, particularly to the students that are gathered here. In our country, you can make a difference. In our country, you can do whatever you want to do. And when you walk out the door of Trine University with that piece of paper that says you graduated and are well educated, you can move on and really make a difference. And being able to make that difference has really what has made America great. This is the greatest country in the world. There's no question about that. And it's been served by some really outstanding people. Humble people, people who want to get things done. That's what we need to get back to in America, where people take a page out of the Angola book. People take a page out of the book, the Peoria book, where people come together, work together, solve problems, and leave the community a better place. We need to leave America a better place. So I hope over the next few weeks, as you're leading up to your primary here, that you'll be paying attention to what these candidates have to say. You have a big, huge Senate race going on here in Indiana. The presidential campaign, I think, will be here. And you have an opportunity to really make a difference, to really get informed, to really participate, to get America back to the idea that when we work together, when we think together, when we're willing to compromise is not a bad word. It surely is not. It means that each side gives a little bit. Then we make a difference. And I can continue on with many of the things that we were involved with, but that's the essence of what has made America great, and that's the essence of my 14 years in Congress, working together, getting to know people. When you know somebody, it's very hard to criticize them. When you're sitting with friends and neighbors, it's very difficult not to want to compromise, not to want to make a difference, not to want to solve problems. And that's what we need to get to in Washington. That's what it used to be. I come from a congressional district, 20 counties. 9 of those counties were once represented by Abraham Lincoln for one term in the U.S. House, by Everett Dirksen, Senate Minority Leader, who worked with Lyndon Johnson. 50 years ago, they passed the Civil Rights Bill. Now, Everett Dirksen came from a very conservative, his hometown was Pekin, Illinois, right across from Peoria, very conservative. But when the election was over, he set aside politics and he worked with Johnson to solve a big problem in our country. Bob Michel, my predecessor, worked with Ronald Reagan with a Democratic Congress and Tip O'Neill as the Speaker. They got a lot done. They solved a lot of problems. They didn't give up on their principles, but they knew why they were there, to get things done, to work together, to make a difference. And that's what we need to do today, and I hope we get back to that. It may take a presidential campaign to get us there. That's where we need to be. So I think as you look at the candidates that are running for president, that are running for the U.S. Senate, that are running for Congress, that are running for governor, are these people going to be looking out for the best interests of the people who elect them? Are they going to be willing to sit down at a table and talk to people across the table they may not necessarily agree with? Are they going to be willing to compromise? Are they really going to be willing to make a difference? If they are, then I think the people will appreciate their efforts. If not, then we're not going to move forward. And really, in a sense, right now it's in your hands to be thinking about this. And that's what we tried to write about in the book, and that's the essence of the work that we've done. And it's phenomenal to me that a person like Ray LaHood from Central Illinois could end up in the position where we were able to make a difference because we were willing to talk and listen and work with others to make a difference. And you can do the same. So Dr. Brooks, thank you for letting me wrap up your lecture series here at Trine University. Thank you to all of those who serve on the board here. Thank you to the community for such an outstanding place for these young people to come and be educated, and ultimately they'll be sitting in your seats as mayor or president or congressman, and hopefully they'll make a difference. Thank you very much. So now, anybody that wants to give a rebuttal or ask a question, there are microphones here. Should I keep talking? Okay. Mayor, thank you for coming.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for your service to our country. So what happened? You know, you have a president you think coming in that wants to reach across the aisle. You have all these people elected that want to get things done. What happened the last 8 years?
You know, that is the question of the hour. That's the question that a lot of people are asking. I do think that President Obama came in with the idea of really trying to work with the Congress and really make a difference. And in the beginning, I think it was difficult because he inherited the worst economy that any of us had seen. I don't know what your unemployment was here in Angola, but you know, around the country it was 10%. The president wanted to put together a very, very big, strong economic stimulus package, which he did. Now remember, in the first 2 years of President Obama's first 4 years, he had a Democrat majority in the House and in the Senate. And they made a decision that they were going to pass a big economic stimulus bill. Some of the money would go to the car companies, some of the money would go to the banks, some of the money would come to DOT so we could send it back to communities to build roads and bridges. And all of that was done with Democratic votes, and frankly, Republicans at that point felt like they had been kind of left on the sidelines. And remember that the president also campaigned on the idea, so he gets his fix for the economy by passing the economic stimulus bill, $870 billion. Then he goes to his next big item. He said we're going to have health care, health insurance for Americans that don't have it. And again, he's got a Democratic Congress. And I think at that point, Republicans felt they were left on the sidelines and weren't included in all of the activity. And I think from then on, so he passes $870 billion economic stimulus, which was much decried and much criticized. And in the end, what happened? Our economy is much better today. The automobile industry is much better today. And so that money did make a difference. And then the president got Congress, a Democratic Congress, during that first 2 years to pass national health care, health insurance for all Americans that wanted it. all Americans that didn't have it. And then you had the 2010 elections when a whole raft, I'd say 40 to 50, Tea Party candidates got elected to the House and a handful got elected in the Senate. And from that point on, it was impossible for the president really to accomplish much legislatively, if anything at all. And so, you know what's happened. You've signed a lot of executive orders, which has infuriated Republicans and others around the country. And he's done that because Congress, frankly, will not or has not passed legislation that he felt was important. And that's i.e. why these executive orders have been passed. I don't think it's because the president didn't try. I do think it's because Republicans felt like perhaps they were on the sidelines during part of this. And you know, basically we say that in the book.
I just wanted to ask you, don't you think it's possible that it's more systemic, like gerrymandering and systems set up so that rather than individuals, that we're getting gerrymandered into more extreme districts? And so then
well, look, there's no question that gerrymandering, where members of Congress every 10 years, once the Senate is taken, can draw the district that they like, has contributed to some of this, because then they draw the people that they want in their district so they can stay where they're at. In states where they've gone to more of a computer system, where the computer actually draws the line, like in California, you do have a pretty big shift in the people who are now serving. They do the same thing in Iowa, and you do have a pretty big shift. So the politicians aren't drawing their own districts in those states, and then you do have more of a mix of people that get involved. I don't deny that. And we're trying to do that in Illinois right now with a petition drive, so that in the next redistricting, which will not be until 2020, when the next census is taken, we may have the opportunity to have non-political people involved in drawing these districts. And people have blamed part of the problem on the idea that in some states, congressmen draw the lines and include the people they want as far as their constituents. And that probably has contributed to some of it. Okay.
I will. Most of you may know that Ray was, in his time in Congress, was acting Speaker of the House. He's probably one of the only person that held the Speaker's gavel so many times. He probably wins first place in that. So you were acting Speaker during the Clinton impeachment hearings. So my question is, hypothetically, if Hillary wins, becomes our next president, how much problems do you think she'll have corralling her husband to stay out of the way? Any thoughts?
Well, I think that we see that Bill Clinton's involved in Hillary's campaign a lot. He's doing a lot of campaigning for her. I wouldn't be surprised if they decide that Indiana is an important state for them, that President Clinton will come here and campaign, and I'm sure that if they make that decision, Hillary will come here and campaign in the state, and it will be an important state if they decide that. So Bill Clinton is always going to be involved in some way, shape, or form in whatever Hillary's doing. And the only way that he doesn't is when she kind of pushes him aside. That hadn't happened much. So we'll see, but he's been very active in her campaign. How about you students?
but I'm not a student.
Okay.
Haven't been for a long time.
You look like a student.
Could you, I think everyone is equally concerned about the fact that Congress has not gotten a lot accomplished in the last decade. However, I'm equally concerned about the tone of this election, and it's hard for me to imagine that any one of the 5 candidates will be able to go back to Congress with such rancor behind them to get anything accomplished in the future. If you were still in Congress, or even if you're in a cabinet, what could you do to bring down the tone of the last 6 months? It's very depressing.
Yeah, I think that you have to elect people, going back to what I said between Gingrich and Clinton, or Reagan and Tip O'Neill. You have to elect people who believe in government. You have to elect people who believe that government can solve some problems and can make a difference. And many of these people simply don't believe that. And so I think if we were still there, what we would try and do is what we write about in the book, and what we did is bring people together, get people to talk to one another, get people to know one another a little bit better. You know, the reason that communities like Angola and other communities all over America get things done is because people are friends and neighbors. And even though they may have differences, they get things done because they know that's what they're supposed to do. And even though they have, you know, maybe to compromise once in a while, they're not offended by that. And sometimes when you have these members of Congress that come to Washington, many of them don't know one another, particularly from one party to the other party. We held these bipartisan retreats where we would invite members of Congress to come together with their families to get to know one another, and then to really begin to work on problems. And I think that was part of the reason that we did have success between Clinton and Gingrich back in the day. When people know one another and have shared goals for making things happen, then good things can happen. But when you have people that are so separated by philosophy and by ideology, it makes it very, very difficult. And I agree with you. I think the tone of this, particularly this presidential campaign, is going to make it very, very difficult for people to believe that any of these leaders are really going to be able to bring people together, which is what it will take. Which is what Reagan was able to do, what Clinton and Gingrich were able to do, and it's a bit troubling. I think that I mean, you could pick any one of the candidates that's still in the race, and think about what they've said about another candidate, or a group of people, or individuals. And how are they really going to be able to rectify that? It's a particularly difficult time right now. There's no question about it. And the truth is, nobody knows how it's going to turn out, or who the nominees are going to be. I think Hillary will be the Democratic nominee, but no one knows who the Republican nominee will be. And I don't think it can be somebody as nasty as Trump, but who knows? Yes, sir. Come, no, you'll be next.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you for stepping forward.
As you being a previous congressman, how do you think Congress will take the appointment of Judge Garland to Supreme Court?
Say the last part again. I know you asked about the Supreme Court now.
Yeah, how do you feel that Congress would take, or how their viewpoints would be taken by the appointment of Judge Garland?
Yeah, I think this. I think it's kind of silly for the majority leader of the Senate the day after Scalia passes away to say we're not going to consider anyone. first of all, the Republicans have the votes to vote up or down anybody they want. So if they don't like Garland, at least give him a hearing, let him have his day in the Senate, and then take a vote. Republicans have the votes to vote him down. And so this idea that, boom, we're not going to do it, that to me is what infuriates the American people. Why are you getting elected? Why do you have this job? Why did you swear to uphold the Constitution, which is what every senator and House member does on the first day of the session? And I just think it just blends into all this other inactivity and do nothing. And but senators, some Republicans are meeting with Garland, but I think the President Obama's administration is hoping there'll be enough pressure that there would be a hearing, but probably unlikely. Congress really isn't in session that much this year because it's an election year. And that's not a good excuse either, but so it just, when you really think about it and analyze it, it just seems silly. And doesn't really make sense. You know, if they didn't have the votes, it'd be different, but they do. Yes, sir.
You've already touched briefly on some of the occupations that some of our students will have, mayor or congressman or teacher. Can you explain or maybe provide some guidance to them of, they probably won't become those occupations the day after graduation. What should they do the minute they walk out of this institution until they do reach that? What things should they do in their life to position themselves to become a successful teacher, mayor, or congressman? What can you provide as far as advice?
I think, look, one of the reasons that I wanted to be a teacher was the teachers that I had in school. They were good mentors for me. And I'm sure every one of these students in here has had somebody who's been a good mentor for them, either a teacher or their parent or someone else that's given them a good direction, good guidance. And we learn our leadership really from other people that we've seen in leadership positions. And as far as politics goes, I would encourage, if you want to really learn about politics, get involved in a campaign. That's where you really learn about politics. That's where you meet the people in politics. That's where you see how the grassroots really works. That's how you see how people really get elected. And don't be afraid if you just have to answer a phone or put a yard sign out or do a mailing or whatever. I think we learn a lot from the example of others. I think we learn a lot from just actually getting involved and participating and paying attention. And many of the things that, while I was a teacher, I remember some of the good teachers I had and tried to use some of the skills that they used when they taught me. When I became a member of Congress, I had watched a lot of other members of Congress. Some of them were mentors. Some of them I wouldn't do anything that they did. But that's really, I think, the value of getting involved in whatever it is. If you're studying engineering and you can work in an engineering firm and you can see how things really work. If you're studying to be a teacher and the whole idea of student teaching and observing and being involved. I think just by paying attention, getting involved, and with the idea that you can learn a lot from just being around, paying attention, being active. This fellow is from Indianapolis. He went to St. Thomas Aquinas School in Indianapolis, and he and I met when his 8th grade class came to Washington, D.C., because my grandchildren go to St. Thomas Aquinas in Indianapolis, and I gave him a tour of the Capitol. right?
Yes, exactly right.
We've already had a picture taken
We
together.
did. It was wonderful.
I'm sorry I don't remember your name.
It's all right. We have a picture from 2008.
The rest of it I got pretty well right.
This is just in regards to more of the separation of church and state in our government more recently. We're seeing a lot of anti-LGBT legislation and just stuff of that nature. And many of the excuses or reasons for providing it is used through religion, despite whatever beliefs you may have. When will we ever be able to have that separation of church and state, and when will we get our mindset away from that and move forward with just non-discrimination towards anybody?
Well, I think we're doing that now. I mean, you see what's going on in Indiana. You see what's going on in North Carolina, where they passed some kind of a restroom or toilet bill or something for certain people, and these things are being played out in states around America now. And I think, I think some of these things will get played out in elections. May get played out in an election here in Indiana. And so I think we're really moving in that direction. Now, yes, sir.
In your leadership positions that you've had, the variety of them, was there a moment or a situation where you could have done something differently? So that's part one of the question. And second is for some of the youth here that are there any approaches or methodologies that you've developed where perhaps some of these younger people could, refrain from, so they don't have to do things differently? They can get it right the first time.
Yeah, the answer to your first question is yes, I've done a lot of dumb things. And if you read my book, you'll see what some of them are. Like most people, like most adults, like most people in leadership, from time to time you do dumb things. Because we're human. Maybe we don't think it through carefully enough. There's not a person in this room who hasn't done something dumb or said something dumb and regretted what they did or said. But that's part of living, and it's part of the kind of humility that you develop when you realize that you've offended someone or you've done something stupid, and sometimes you can take it back and sometimes you can't. I think this, as far as these students go, they're getting the best education, better than I got, better than my brother got, and we both got good educations, but theirs is better because we know more. And the one thing that I think is so important is that they pay attention to people and adopt the kind of philosophy and attributes and skills of the people that they really admire. We all experience people, whether we're students or adults, things that we admire about them, their leadership, their decisions, the way they make their decisions. And those are the things that I think young people need to think about and adopt and incorporate and make a part of becoming an adult and being a part of the opportunity of making a difference. And there are not five things to leadership. There are many different things and many different experiences and many different people who influence the leaders, people that are leaders. In a sense, we're all leaders, some more prominent than others, and we've developed this leadership ability from our own experiences of the people that have helped us, have mentored us, have really encouraged us. Here comes a question. Thank you for asking the question.
As far as the gridlock goes that Congress has, as every candidate has had made some enemies in the campaign out, do you have any short-term solutions for getting out of that? Longer-term election cycles and all that can alleviate.
Say that, do I have a, say the question part of it.
Do you have any ideas for a short-term solution for the congressional deadlock?
It's really difficult right now. The question is there a short-term, some things that we could do right now for the congressional gridlock? I mean, when I served for 14 years, almost all the people that I served with for 14 years, and people would come and go, and some would be reelected and some wouldn't. Almost all the people, the majority, 99.9%, were there because they wanted to get things done, either for their district, for the people that sent them to Washington, or for the country. And I'm afraid there's a small group of people in the House and a small group in the Senate don't believe in government, vote no on everything, try and stop everything. They're the crowd that shut the government down. They're the crowd that ran Boehner out of office. And those kind of people did not exist when I served for 14 years in Congress. Where there's some people with different ideas than mine, of course. But almost all the people were well motivated by the idea that they had an important job being a congressman, that they were there to make laws, they were there to make a difference, they were there to make change, they were there to solve problems. And there are some people in Congress today who don't have that kind of philosophy. And if they don't, you know, Paul Ryan started the year off as Speaker with the idea they were going to pass a budget. There's about 40 people in the House, mostly Tea Party, and I don't want to offend any Tea Party people here, but these are Tea Party people. They don't like the budget. Congress hasn't passed the budget yet. Doesn't look like Congress is going to pass a budget. In the state of Illinois, where I'm from, we're the only state in the country that hasn't passed a budget. Mostly because the Speaker of the House in Illinois, who's been there for 30 years, a guy named Madigan, and a new governor, a Republican named Rauner, can't get together. And so I think what I say is, look at the people that are running for office. Are these the people that are going to move America forward? Are these the people that are going to solve tax reform, pass a budget, solve immigration reform, fix the roads? Or are they going to be the people that say, hey, government has no role? And, you know, if your mayor wasn't doing anything, he wouldn't have been in office 15 years. President Brooks wasn't doing anything, the Board of Trustees would have sent him off to another campus. When you get an important job, a leadership job, you got to get something done. That's what elections are about. Unfortunately, I agree with the young lady who looked like a student, who said our choices are not very good for president. And they're not. Makes it difficult.
I'm a lifelong student, so I feel like I can ask this. The comments about the Supreme Court nominee, I think, point out to a lot of us how politicized the Supreme Court has become. So instead of 3 branches of government, you've now kind of gotten 2 with a lot of overlap here. What do you think about term limits for, one, the Supreme Court, but also for Congress?
I think term limits are a good idea for everybody. And I'll tell you why. We term limit the president. Why did we do that? Why did we? The Constitution originally said no term limit. But why did the country change that? Now remember, in order to change the Constitution, you have to pass a constitutional amendment, which means that a majority of the House, U.S. House, a majority of the Senate has to pass the amendment, then 3/5 of the states, and this is not a vote of the people. When we say the states have to pass it, look, I'm an old civics teacher, I know this stuff. What we mean is that the state assembly has to pass it. So it's hard to pass a constitutional amendment. Well, we've passed plenty. But why did we term limit the president? It was because people thought Roosevelt was going to be the king. He got elected to his third term. Remember what the founders said? We want to get away from the king. We want a democracy. We want the people to have their say. And Roosevelt gets elected to a third term. What happens? Constitutional amendment to limit it. What happens? Roosevelt dies in office. Truman becomes president. Did you want to say something? No. Pardon me? Oh, was it his fourth term? Yeah, shows you what I know as a civics teacher, right? Hey, humility, remember? I should remember that. My point is this. If we term limit the president, why don't we term limit Congress? Why should they be able to run as often as they want? You know, people are mad at the Supreme Court right now because, you know, they think John Roberts betrayed them on the Obamacare stuff. If you don't like Obamacare, you feel like Roberts. And, you know, if you don't like another opinion on this. But the point is, nobody should have a lifetime job in government. We should get new people in there, new ideas. There's a lot of smart people in America. Give them a chance to serve. But we have to pass a constitutional amendment to do it. Maybe when we term limit Congress, we should include the Supreme Court. Or set an age. You know, most companies have an age when you have to retire. Caterpillar is a big company in my hometown of Peoria. When you turn 65, if you're the CEO, boom, you're gone. That's it. That's a rule they have. And you know, when I'm a Catholic, so when you're a cardinal in the Catholic Church and you turn 75, I don't care how good you are, you're gone. It's a good rule. Give somebody else a chance. So I think it's a good idea. But, you know, trying to get a constitutional amendment, it's hard. Roosevelt got elected 4 times. But people were mad about that and thought he had too much power. Then he dies in office. So. Anybody else? Okay.
First of all, hasn't this been a wonderful afternoon? It's been great. A lot of what you've talked about and what today's all about has been talking about leadership. You've had the opportunity to serve several different administrations, talking about the Clinton administration, the Bushes, the Obama. Sure, there's a lot of stories there, but can you take just a minute to talk about the differences in contrasting styles in leadership? And because I think it's important for students to know that leadership doesn't come from one direct style or one direct management style. Can you talk a little bit about working for the numerous presidents you've worked with?
This is something I should have said earlier. And all of you adults in positions of leadership know this. Every job is about relationships, but politics is really about relationships. If you read Robert Caro's books about Lyndon Johnson, the reason he was so successful is he had all of these relationships with these senators that he served with because he was majority leader when he was in the Senate. Kennedy picks him as a VP. Kennedy's assassinated. Johnson becomes president. He works with a very conservative guy like Everett Dirksen, passes the Civil Rights Bill. 50 years ago, but passes a lot of legislation. Why? Because he would call up senators, he'd call them by their first name, he'd get them down White House, they'd have a drink together. I think the presidents that interact with Congress on a regular basis, have the relationships, are the most successful. I would be willing to, if we ask Dr. Brooks, what makes a successful college president? Part of it is being able to have the relationships with the people that work with you, the people that teach the kids, the professors, the faculty. And it's true of most jobs. But Ronald Reagan was successful with a Democratic Congress because he had a great relationship with Tip O'Neill. They played golf together, they played cards together, and Chris Matthews writes about this in a couple books. Chris was Tip O'Neill's press secretary. Why was Reagan successful? Well, he was a good communicator, but he had the relationships with the people that he needed to have relationships with. I worked for then Minority Leader Bob Michael when he was the Minority Leader and Reagan was president. Every week, President Reagan would ask Bob Michael, give me a list of about 8 or 10 congressmen that I can invite down to the White House. We'll have dinner, and I'll get to know them. And it's that relationship. The presidents that had the relationships, most of the Democrats stood with Bill Clinton during impeachment. And they were strong. Why? Because Clinton had a relationship with these guys and gals. A very good relationship. And whether they liked what he did, whether they thought it was impeachable, they stood by him. And so this whole relationship thing is just so critical. And when I look back at presidents that were successful, either legislatively or solving problems, I think when the books are written about President Obama, one of the things that's going to be written is he's had great relationships with a lot of foreign leaders. And wherever the president goes around the world, he's beloved. And those kind of relationships maybe could have been more developed with Congress, but the presidents that had good relationships with Congress got an awful lot done and really made a difference. And I would say that about speakers of the House. Remember this, when you're Speaker of the House, you're not Speaker of a party, you're Speaker of the House. And the speakers that I watch, like Tip O'Neill and Tom Foley and a few others, respected all the members, not just the members of their party, and took into account all the members and the fact that they were all there to vote. And the members of Congress appreciated that and revered that kind of leadership. So this relationship business, you don't have to always agree, but the ability to talk to one another, work with one another, and then again, compromise is not a bad word. It's what it takes to get things done.
Couple of things as you leave today. I'm going to put in a plug for your book, which, by the way, is out in the hallway. It's Bipartisan Leadership. It's a great read. I think it goes back to the times that we all hearken for. We've talked about today to get back to a time when we'd like to see politics and Congress operate in a fashion similar to when it was, Mr. Secretary, when you were in Congress. But please take a minute to pick up one of those. And not sure everybody realizes today the schedule that this man keeps with all of his travel around the United States and the demands on his time, and what a special treat it is to have him here this afternoon. And Mr. Secretary, we'd just like to give you a small token of our appreciation for joining us here at Trine University this afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for attending this afternoon.